Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rebecca Vieira, and I'm the coordinator of the Inter-American Teacher Education Network, or ITEN for short, an initiative of the Organization of American States. I'm pleased to welcome you all to this webinar, one in our series of webinars, COVID-19, Teaching STEM in Quarantine. Before continuing, I'd like to briefly introduce ITEN to those of you who are not familiar with us. The purpose of ITEN is to improve the quality and equity of education through teacher education in the Americas. To do so, we offer funds and activities for educational leaders with the intent to resolve problems of policy and practice related to STEM teacher education, in which STEM refers to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. To learn more about us and how to get involved, please visit our website, and the link will be shared at the end of this presentation. Presented by teacher fellows, participants, and other supporters of ITEN Project's teams, the series of webinars objective is to support the efforts of teachers during this time of quarantine. To join future webinars, again, please visit our webpage. This evening, we're pleased to have a presentation from Channa Comer, a master science teacher from New York City of the United States of America. During this presentation, you're welcome to ask questions using the Q&A tool. We do encourage you to interact with each other through the chat, but please make sure that your questions are submitted to the Q&A tool, just because otherwise we probably won't see them. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording as well as the slides will be linked to the ITEN COVID-19 webinars webpage. In approximately 24 hours, you will receive a notice that the recording is uploaded. The message that you receive may also serve as evidence of your attendance, should you need to show it to your administrators. Additionally, we would like to express our gratitude to the Educational Portal of the Americas, which is providing support to transmit this presentation live via their Facebook page, and especially to our donor, the U.S. Vision to the OAS. At the conclusion of this webinar, please do not forget to complete a brief survey that will be helpful in determining future webinars. Thank you very much for your attendance, and at this point, I will hand over the presentation to Channa.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today and so excited to see people from so many different places all over the world. I've been watching the chat, seeing people here from Kansas and Panama, Canada, Ecuador, Michigan, Wisconsin, Texas, Indiana, Massachusetts, Hawaii, Michigan, Florida, Illinois, Georgia, the Philippines, Arizona, California, Missouri, Connecticut, Virginia, Oregon, Baja California, Mexico, Washington State, Jamaica, Alabama, Colorado, Honduras, Colombia, if I left anyone out, Ohio. Hello to everyone. I'm so excited to see all of you. And of course, my home state of New York, which is where I'm coming to you guys from. And I look forward to us learning together, because just like you, I'm a teacher. This is an unprecedented time for us. It's a new situation. This remote learning, full-time remote learning, is something that I've never done before. And so I'm hoping to learn with you, as well as share what I've learned so far along the way. And I just want to also say, before we get started, my heart goes out to anyone here who's experienced any losses due to the pandemic and all of the crises that are going on around the world. So a little bit about who I am. I'm going to go ahead and launch into my presentation. So a little bit about who I am. Again, my name is Channa Comer. I'm an educator in New York City. I was born and raised. This is the house that I grew up in Brooklyn, in East New York, Brooklyn. And that's me as a little girl, never knowing that I would go on to become an educator. So education has certainly been key in my life, both as a student and also as a teacher. I credit education with everything that positive things that have happened in my life. It's been huge for me to be able to help other people, both adults and children, to learn and to grow. So I've gone all over the world, both helping teachers and prospective teachers. I've taught abroad, and I've also coached teachers as well. But my primary role in education has been teaching students. And most of my time has been spent in middle school. I have worked from grades 5 through grades 12, but the bulk of my time has been teaching middle school students, and primarily in grades 6 and 7. In addition to my work with teachers, my work with students, I've been featured in Wired Magazine, Quantum Magazine, and also the Teaching Channel, both in a podcast and on their video series for education. So in my context of the current school that I'm working in, I'm teaching in the Bronx in New York City. My population that I work with is a multi-ethnic population. So I have students from at least 20 different countries around the world. Many of my students are English language learners. Many of them are immigrants. I also have a number of first generation students and students who are at very high poverty levels. So just to give you a little bit of sense of the background of the context of what I'm presenting today. And hopefully we'll get a time to talk about how you would be able to adapt some of the things that I've done to work specifically with the students in the context that you're working with. So in our time together today, I'm going to be talking about 3 main things with regards to interactive demonstrations for remote learning. I'll be talking about choosing the right activity. I will also be talking about, sorry about that, giving you just a method that I've developed. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about different ways that we can help students be able to share what they're learning with authentic audience, and that takes it beyond them sharing what they've learned with just the teacher. I'll also be stopping at a couple of different points throughout the presentation for Q&A and to get some feedback from you. So as questions come up, you are free to put them in the Q&A, and then also I'll be looking at a few things from the chat itself. So before we get started with the actual presentation, I want to do just a quick poll to start to get a sense of who's in the audience today. So if you could take a few moments to answer the following 3 questions. Have you taught or currently teaching remotely? What grade level you teach? And what subject you're teaching, if you're a teacher. We're at about 70%, so I'm going to let the poll run for another 10 seconds, and then I'll close it out and take a look. And I know that some people are not able to do the poll for different reasons. I've seen some of the answers in the chat, so thank you for participating, whether you could do the poll or are in the chat. And I'm going to share the results with everyone so that you can all see. And it looks like almost everyone who was able to respond has done some remote teaching this year, 89%. And the majority of our participants today are in secondary education, ages 14 to 18, with a few in middle school and some elementary, and we've got our pre-K and kindergarten teachers there as well. The bulk of our attendees looks like physical science is the most well-represented group. Uh, and we have some general science, some life science, and a smattering of others. And if you get a chance to put it in the chat, it would be really interesting to hear what the others are. I tried to think of all the categories that I could. And if there's others that I missed, please feel free to put those in the chat. I'm really happy to see some familiar faces here too in the group. So the next thing I wanted to ask is to give me a little bit more of a sense of who's in the room. Those of you who are doing remote learning or who have done some remote learning this period, what is it that's been the greatest challenge for you? And then the second question is, what's your primary motivation for coming to this webinar? So I have everything's prepared, but I'm hoping to be able to make sure that I cover the things that you're most interested in hearing about. So go ahead and put in the chat what your greatest challenge has been and what your primary motivation is for signing up for this webinar. So student attendance, not knowing if they've watched recording, labs, student engagement, teaching multiple preps. They're coming fast and furious. How to hold kids' attention. So most of the trends is around engagement ideas for the fall, because we don't know whether this remote learning is going to continue into the fall. Hands-on science. Cheating. Labs. Keeping kids attached to the computer all day. Translating labs to online. Yeah, definitely a big trend that I see in the chat is the motivation and students being engaged. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to plunge into this unknown territory of doing interactive demos and labs during this remote learning period, because I felt that it's hard to convey the concepts to students without the hands-on component, because in my experience, that's how they learn the best, and that's what is engaging them and really gets them excited about science. And I also didn't want to have just worksheets and have kids sitting at home doing worksheets on Google Doc. But I will be completely transparent. It is a lot of work. So it definitely would have been much easier for me to go ahead and just do some readings and some worksheets and throw them up on Google Docs and call it a day. But I just felt like that was not going to be in the best interest of my students. And to be honest, for me, it's actually boring. So I actually don't enjoy sitting at my computer all day reading hundreds of Google Docs. I have 120 students that I teach across 4 classes. And so doing a lot of work on Google Docs and just sitting all day at the computer just reading Google Docs, for me, that is not very engaging. And we've been doing remote learning here in New York City since March 20th. And so it's very hard to stay engaged myself. And I can't imagine for the students as well. And thinking about the fact that they're also getting the same type of work from all of their teachers. So my students have art, they have social studies, science, English, Spanish. And so if everybody's just giving worksheets, I can't imagine that it would be that engaging for kids to sit all day and do that. So that's one of the reasons it's worth it for me, for engagement for myself and for my students. So I did a little survey of my students, and about half of my kids responded. I just gave the survey out recently, and half of them responded. And of the students who responded, I found that they're pretty lukewarm about remote learning, which was actually a surprise to me, because I thought perhaps that students would be more on the negative end of remote learning. For the most part, they're kind of in the middle. They're like, it's okay with on either end. Some students saying that it's really terrible, and some students saying that it's really great. So a lot of the reasons why some students said that they enjoyed it, they liked the fact that they can take their time and do things at their own pace. they don't feel rushed. And then some students actually said that they like not being in class because they don't get distracted as much. So those are some of the things that they enjoyed about it. The things that they didn't enjoy about it, they say that they feel they're being overwhelmed with work. And it's hard when they cannot ask immediate questions and get immediate feedback from teachers the way they can in the classroom. So those are just some of the things that my students told me that they liked and disliked about remote learning. But overall, they're lukewarm. They don't hate it. They don't love it. For the most part, it's okay. I did also ask them if the science demonstrations that we've been doing help them to understand better. And 87% of the students who responded said yes. So definitely validating for me as a teacher that all the work that I've put in to create these lessons for them and to do the interactive lessons has been worth the time and the effort. So I'm going to launch right into the first part of the presentation, which is choosing the right activity. And so choosing the right activity to me is the most important part of the whole process, because that is going to make or break the experience for you and for the students, right? Once you get all the planning done, the actual execution of the demonstration is pretty simple and it's fun. It's just really choosing the activity that makes the biggest difference. So here's an example of what could go wrong, right? So you're doing the kids are doing it at home, and it might work, but you don't know what the ramifications are going to be because you're not there with the students. You're not seeing them when they're doing it, because sometimes students are doing them asynchronously and synchronously. So I'm going to get into that a little bit when I get into my specific method of doing the demonstrations, and talk about how students are doing them in both ways, both synchronously and asynchronously. So I've talked a little bit about some of the, one of the things about choosing the activity is to be aware of your context. So I described my context a little bit, and some of the things that I have, the constraints that I have based on the context. So my students are in an urban area. They're in the Bronx, and the Bronx is one of the most hard-hit areas in New York City. The Bronx and Queens were the two hardest hit areas in New York City with the coronavirus. And that is one of the major constraints. The fact that I don't know what students are dealing with at home. The fact that my students we have a high poverty level in the students that I teach. And so I had to make sure that the students had activities that could be done indoors. I would have loved to have students going outside and doing things in nature, but I could not take the risk of my students being outside, being around other people. Also, the lack of supervision. So some of my students are at home alone because their parents are out working. And so I had to make sure that whatever activities I chose, activities that could be done at home and with minimal supervision and be safe. I also had to make sure that the activities were inexpensive because my students don't have a lot of resources, and some of them don't have money to go out and buy a lot of different materials. So I had to choose activities that were easy to do at home and used very inexpensive materials or things that they might already have around the home. So I'll talk a little bit more when I get into the examples of some of the activities that I did. And again, my context is middle school, 7th grade. And so your context will be different depending on what age group, but there's a lot of high school teachers here. So thinking about what are some things that fit within the scope of your curriculum at the high school level that are accessible to your students at home. So again, the resources that your students have access to is one of the areas that you need to consider. One of the other considerations is time. So my school, our periods are 25 minutes long, and so my interactive time with the kids is only 25 minutes. And so that was a huge constraint that I had to think about when planning activities, because I have to choose things that could be done in a 25-minute period from start to finish. I only work with my students 3 times a week, or 2 or 3 times a week directly, because they stagger the subject areas so that the students are not overwhelmed with lots of classes and work from multiple teachers throughout the week. And so keeping kids engaged and being able to do an activity that would fit in one session was important, because that time, the day or 2 days in between, would be difficult to kind of pick up where we left off. The other thing is, yes, 25 minutes. It's quite a challenge. And so the other piece is the alignment to standards in the curriculum unit. So one of the important things to think about is, and that I've learned with this whole remote experience, is really chunking in a way, even more so than when you are trying to differentiate in your classroom with different learners, is you've got to chunk things down really to very, very bite-sized pieces, and being able to figure out what is that 1 or 2 things that I want students to come away with in this activity, and how does this activity that I'm doing align with the unit and with the standards that I want them to learn. And so that piece of it is really the critical component, because there's lots of activities, there's lots of really fun things that you can do with students, but you have to distill it to the most simple, basic thing. What's the one thing that I want the kids to walk away from with this activity? So those are the 3 primary things to think about as you plan what activities you would be doing with your students. So I want you to go ahead and write in the chat some considerations, because those are my unique considerations and constraints. I'd love to hear from you. What are some considerations that are unique to your student population? What are some things that you're thinking about as you think about how to plan demonstrations or hands-on activities with the students? What are some of your constraints? Multilingual students, multi-age group, rural, poor, and don't have internet connections, access to materials, lack of devices. Will they participate? Grade-driven, but not learning-driven. They cannot use technology during Shabbat. Technology on the fly. Tired. They're tired. They're burnt out. Lack of motivation. The people who are dealing with students who are at the end of their grade level and ready to move on, if they already have their high schools picked out or the next steps picked out, keeping them engaged is very difficult. Openers, okay. Yes, kids do not know how to schedule their day. Awesome. So I look forward to seeing your questions. I see a lot of questions that I'm not addressing in the presentation, but please ask specific questions around time, around technology, if there are things that don't come up, around scheduling, and how I've been able to work a little bit with my students with that, accommodating IEPs. One of the things that I find with regards to students with special needs is that the hands-on piece helps so much. Some of the best work that I've received from students when it comes to assessment, we had to do a portfolio assessment for the students at the end, for the end of the year with all of our students in every subject. And some of the best work that I've received from students actually has been with my students with IEPs. They come because they have the IEPs, they want that extra support. They're the ones that actually show up the most to the live classes that I give, and they are submitting some of the best work. So that's, it's really beneficial for those students in particular. So when we talk about interactive, what do we actually mean, right? So here, it's really a continuum of interactivity. Someone mentioned that in the chat that when they do the interactive lessons, they're just using it as a hook or an opener. And so you have a range of interactivity with students that could go from the students just watching your demonstration, they're making observations, they're making predictions, they're trying to explain the phenomena that you see happening, all the way to the other end of the continuum where students are completing the activity with you from start to finish. And I've done on both ends of that continuum. And it really depends on the type of activity that you're doing with the students, what materials are required, how much prep and planning is required for the activity will determine how much interactivity you have with them. So I just want to do another little poll, and I want to just ask you guys in the area where you see the participants, how many of you are familiar with or are using the flipped classroom model? If I could just see hands of if you're doing flipped classroom, if you are familiar with it, if you're using it. Nice. I see a lot of hands up. That's awesome. A lot of hands up. So I call what I use for the interactive demonstrations a modified flip. So I'm not doing a full flip where they actually have to watch a video, answer questions. I do a modified flip. So when I flip, I give them the information that they will need to be able to participate in the demonstration, but only enough so that they would still need to come to the actual lesson. So I see that once a few people are not familiar with flipped classroom. So basically in the flipped classroom, you're giving the students the opportunity to kind of pre-learn what it is that you're going to be working on. So if you have a reading, if you have a video, they're basically getting what would be the direct instruction prior to meeting with you. And so when they get to meet with you, then you're spending your time doing the really deep thinking work with them and more of the active work with the students as opposed to you doing a lot of the direct teaching. So they come in preloaded with some of the information that will help them to be able to have a deeper learning experience when they're with you. And so depending again on the activity that I'm doing with the students, determines what kind of information I'm asking them to do beforehand. So sometimes it might be a video that they have to watch before we do the demonstration, or I would give them a text to read. If I'm asking them to actually participate in the activity with me, I will give them a list of materials that they would need to purchase or gather to be ready to actually do the activity with me. And so it really depends on what the activity is, what preparation they will need to do beforehand. And so you would have to make all of those decisions once you are planning the actual activity. And if they're small children, obviously you would need the parents and the families to be involved, right? So that adds another layer of complexity, particularly if you have families that don't speak the same language that students are being taught in, and you would have to do some translation and some teaching with the parents. One of the other things that I do is I create using screencast videos of tutorials. I do them for kids, for parents. Sometimes those tutorials, I send them off to the parents. For example, we use Google Classroom as our platform for recording students' grades, for assigning work, and everything that I do is linked to my Google Classroom. And so I created a tutorial screencast video for parents to show them how to access the Google Classroom, and they can actually look into the children's accounts and see their assignments and see what their students are doing. Because one of the things that came up in my setting, a lot of students were submitting work, but they're submitting work that's blank. And so when the parents get the summary from Google Classroom, they see that all the student work is submitted, but they don't actually know what the students are doing. And when we started contacting some parents, the parents would say, well, I see my son or daughter at the computer all day. I don't know what they're doing, but they look like they're working. And so I did a screencast to teach them do how to go on to the kid's account and actually look at the work. I've also done screencast videos for students to show them how to do some of those tech skills so that I don't use that time during my live classes with them to teach them the tech skills. I do the screencasts for them. So I've taught them how to access different programs. I've taught them how to use, because they're not really that tech savvy in terms of being able to actually use technology. They know how to do YouTube and all of the social media, but they're actually not very skilled at how to create a PowerPoint presentation. How do I get a picture from my phone and put it into a presentation or into a document. So I do a lot of screencasting tutorials for them to teach them all those tech skills as well. So I've talked a little bit about some of the thinking that goes behind and the prep that goes into doing the demonstrations. And the other thing, and preloading the students with the information that you might want them to know beforehand, or the instructions that they would need. But I also try not to give them too much information, because I don't want them to do the actual activity on their own, because then they won't come to the demo, right? So they'll give them too much, they'll be able to do it at home and they won't come. And they may have some misconceptions, or maybe they won't do things correctly. And so I give them just enough information that they're prepared, but not so much that they can actually complete the whole thing. So for example, when I did the ice cream lab with them, I gave them all the materials that they would need to do the ice cream lab. I gave them some background information and history about ice cream, but I didn't actually give them the steps to the process to making it. So they had to come to the demo to actually see me do it before they were able to do it themselves. So the other thing that's super, 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 super critical is to practice, right? So just like in the classroom, if you're going to do a hands-on activity with the kids, you have to practice it first. It's even more critical to practice it before you do it in a demo online. You have to make sure that everything is going to work. The other thing that I learned is you also have to think about the differences in the ambient temperature from where you are versus where the students might be, or when you're practicing, the ambient temperature is different than the ambient temperature the day that you do the demo, and that could impact the results that you get. So there's a lot of things that you have to think about with being able to control variables. You also have to make sure that the timing will work. As I mentioned before, I have 25 minutes with my students, so I have to make sure that whatever I'm doing is going to be able to be completed within that 25 minutes. The other piece that practice is important is the tech setup, which is not something we have to worry about in the classroom. I have to make sure that I have my camera angled at the right position so that the students are seeing what I want them to see, instead of just looking at my hands, for example, versus looking at what I'm demonstrating. So figuring out, when do I need to bring the camera closer to the table that I'm working on? When do I need to pull it away? When do I need them to see my face? And then also thinking about, depending on what platform you're using, we use Google Meets at my school. What does a student view look like? And actually working with the students and teaching them how to pin the video so that what the demonstration that you're doing is full screen for them. So all of these little details you have to think about when you're practicing. In terms of the cameras and what I use, so I do actually have two laptops. So I have a laptop that was given to me by the school for the remote learning period, and then I have my personal computer. And so I actually set up my Google Meets on two computers. And so I have one, we have a dummy student account at my school. I log in on one computer as the student, and I log in on one computer as the teacher. And so then I can see what the students are looking at as a student. So if I'm, like I check my camera angles and I do all of that so that I could see the student, but I'm just using the camera. I have a Mac, my personal computer is a Mac, and then I have a ThinkPad. And so it's just looking at, it's just using the camera on the computer for the demo. Now I'm going to get into the asynchronous part later, but this is for the synchronous part. So this is when I'm doing the live demo with the kids, and the kids are either working with me or they're just watching and answering questions. So I want to get moving because I don't want to run out of time, because I do want to talk a little bit about kids being able to share their work with an audience. So an example for the unit that I'm working on that's actually just finished is phases of matter. And so the main area of focus for this unit was being able to explore the macro and the molecular scale of matter and phase change. And so 3 examples of the activities that I did in my demo lessons are I did ice cream, as I mentioned before. I did a lab, an actual experiment on making bubbles and using different bubble solution to look at evaporation and how quickly the water between the 2 layers of molecules would evaporate. So I did oobleck, which is a very standard lab, and that was one of the easier ones to do. And I actually had students doing it with me, which was really cool to be on Google Meets and be able to watch the students actually doing the lab with, and this particular student, as I mentioned before, with the IEP. So this is one of my students, one of my most struggling students with an IEP, who was able to access this lab, and she was doing it with her little brother. And it was just really amazing to watch her do the activity and enjoy it so much, and really, being able to access science in a way that she wouldn't be if she was just looking at a Google Doc and answering questions at her computer at home. So that was really exciting. So I wanted to just give you guys, so I'm going to talk a little bit now. So I have 30 kids in a class. So because the live classes are not mandated, they're not mandated for teachers or students, it's a mixed bag of who comes to the class. So when I was doing the live demos, I would do 4 of them in a day. I only did the demos once a week, and I would do 4 25-minute demos in a day. And the other thing that I do, so I'm now going to talk about the asynchronous part. So in addition to doing the live demos with the students, I would also then record myself doing the activity so that the students who were not able to come to the live sessions, because everyone's situation is different. Some of my students, like many of yours, are sharing technology with siblings. And so even though I had a set time of when I'm doing my live classes, students were not always able to make it to the live class for different reasons. And so I would videotape myself doing a demo so that the students who weren't able to come to the live classes could also then engage in the activity on their own time. So I just want to share with you just a brief, I'm not going to play the whole thing. The other thing that, and I saw someone write this earlier in the chat about the length of the video. So I try to keep all of my videos down to 10 minutes, no more than 10 minutes. And so this is the ice cream lab that I talked about. So for my videos, I actually have a digital camera with a 4K video camera. I have a light box. So I kind of have a setup with a tripod, a light box, and all of that. But that, obviously everybody doesn't have to do that. But these are things that I already had before remote learning. So I just utilize what I have at home. So here's, my video. Let's see, will it play? Yes, here we go. So I'm going to just speed it up and move to a portion of the... So I'm going to use a whisk to mix it up. And as you can see, I'm in my kitchen, right? I do the videos in my kitchen. So here we go. We're going to fill our jar up about halfway with crushed ice. And then we're going to add about 6 tablespoons of our rock salt. Next comes the fun part. Make sure that you put your gloves on for this part because the jar is going to get pretty cold. So we add the salt to lower the freezing point of our ice. So instead of 32 degrees, it can get down to as low as 14 degrees. So make sure you're wearing gloves. Now for this, you might want to get some help because you've got to shake for quite a while. So we need to shake the jar with the salt in it for about 5 minutes. So you guys get the point. Thank you. The Rachel Ray comment, that was cute. So I do a video for each of the demos so that the students who weren't able to come can do it on their own. So I do it multiple times practicing myself. I do it with the students, and then I do another video so that I can upload it. And I have a YouTube channel. I make my I do all my videos and I upload them to YouTube, and then I share the links with the students in my Google Classroom assignment. I just post the link, and I've actually also given the students a separate document that has all the videos in one place. And yes, so the kids actually did make their ice cream at home, and I'm going to actually take some questions now. I'm going to pause right now and take questions. But when I polled the students about whether or not they did the lab activities, whether it was synchronous or asynchronous, they said that it was about 70% of the students did the labs, whether they did them on their own time or whether they did them with me. So I'm going to stop sharing now. I don't, Rebecca, can you tell me if there are any questions?
Yes, we have actually quite a few questions.
Awesome.
Let's see. So I'm just going to select some. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but let's see. One here, do you find that breaking up an activity into multiple days is better or worse for students? And do you see changes in engagement if you have experience with that?
In the classroom, it's easier to control because I see my students 4 days a week. And so I can gauge how long it's going to take to do certain points and stop it at strategic points. I don't do activities across multiple days remotely because I don't think that it would work because students aren't always able to come every single time. And also, I don't think that that students would really be able to maintain that connection of what we did before and pick up where we left off. I don't know how many students have little siblings at home that they have to worry about. They may not have a place where they can leave something set up for the next time we meet. So there's a lot of variables. I don't do activities that require more than one setting.
Thank you. We have another question about what kinds of items do you actually ask students to gather or to purchase? Jennifer Mayo says, I don't think we could ask to purchase. It would be more like if you happen to have these materials at home and it's okay with your family to use them, then it might work. So
yeah. So here, the other piece with the asynchronous piece, the fact that I do the videos, if for whatever reason the student's not able to purchase or get materials, they don't have to because they can watch me do the whole thing on the video. So the asynchronous piece is really important because it provides equity for students to be able to access what's happening, whether they're able to do the lab or not. The things that I ask students to buy, for example, oobleck, which I saw in the chat, Rebecca, you wrote that it's cornstarch and water. So it's $1 for a box of cornstarch and it's tap water. So the ice cream activity, it was heavy cream and ice and sugar. And the only thing that someone may not have, I mean, heavy cream they might have to obviously purchase if that's not something they use in their home, is the rock salt, if they could get the rock salt. So those are the only things. And so none of this is mandatory. They can still access the demonstration by watching the video. Obviously, it's not the same as them actually being able to do it themselves hands-on, but I do try as much as possible to keep things simple. The other thing that they had to do was create a 3D model, molecular model for their portfolio presentation. And in the demo lab that I did for that, I gave them ideas of how they could use things that they have at home, like beans or pasta, different things that they would find already around the house. So I try as much as possible to keep it to things that they have at home. And occasionally they would need to buy things, but I try to keep it also very inexpensive things like salt and cornstarch and things like that.
Great. I have two more questions that I think you can probably address fairly quickly because you do have more presentation after this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So the first one of the last two that I'll ask right now is how do you pick which one to do the demo labs with? We have a handful of curricular standards to cover, and I find it difficult to choose which ones to focus on.
I go by the standards. So my theme, the main things that I was working on with this particular unit is molecular motion and phase change. So everything that I did had something to do with molecules and phase change. So molecular motion and scale, right? So we're aligned with the NGSS. So we're looking at the cross-cutting concepts as well. So scale, molecular motion, phase change. So I kept it very simple to those three things, and everything that I did, the ice cream, the oobleck, the bubbles, all of those had one of those three elements in them. So I keep it very tightly aligned to specifically what skills or standards I'm looking for the students to learn.
Great. And then the last one for right now is, what recording system do you use to make your videos?
So as I mentioned, I actually will just grab my camera for you. This is a camera that I already own, so I did not buy this for remote learning. It's a digital camera with 4K video capability. So I just record on it. I take the card out, the video card, I upload it into my Mac computer, and then I upload the video onto YouTube. I don't edit videos. I don't know how to edit videos. So I do my video. It may take me maybe 2 takes to get it without, any major flubs, but I just take the 10-minute video, I post it as is, no editing, no fancy screens or pictures or anything. I just do it one time, try to do it just once, and whatever it is, that's what it is.
Excellent, thank you. All right, I'll let you go ahead and return back to your screen sharing when you're ready.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm just gonna talk really briefly about the last part of it is just really making it, and this goes to the piece about engagement and how to get the kids really engaged and wanting to get involved with the work, is having an audience other than the teacher. So if they have an audience other than you or me, hopefully they will be more motivated to put more effort and energy into the work. And they also just get more out of it because they know it's not just something that is just going to be stuck in a Google Drive, right? Other people are actually going to see this work. And so I wanted to talk about 2 platforms that you can use for students to be able to share with an authentic audience, either whether it's their peers, whether it's with their families, or whether it's with the school community at large. And the 2 that I wanted to highlight today was one of them I've used this remote learning period. I actually just learned how to use it. And the other is Flipgrid. And so I just wanted to very quickly show you. This is a student video. It doesn't have the students because of privacy issues and HIPAA regulations. I chose a video that it does not have a student speaking, but I did want to share with you just so that you can see what a Flipgrid video looks like if you haven't used Flipgrid.
Today we're going to talk about the process of phase change, explaining what causes the molecules to change, and also the movement of the molecules. As you can see, I have displayed a molecular model using pasta as a demonstration of molecules, solid, liquid, and gas. If you were looking at a piece of ice which is solid, you would see that the molecules are tightly packed together in an arrangement of atoms, and they vibrate a little bit. If we would want to change a solid to a liquid, you need to transfer energy into the substance solid. Adding heat to a solid will allow our molecules to move freely around each other. This phase change is called melting, which means solid turning into a liquid. Liquid molecules stay close together and flow around each other. These pipe cleaners represent the molecules moving in place, but the liquid molecules are not close and touching as the molecules of a solid. Now, if we want to change our phase change from a liquid to a gas, we have to transfer energy into the substance liquid. As you add the heat, the liquid will turn into gas. This phase change is called evaporation. Our molecules of a gas will move faster and move further away from each other. I will add 2 pipe cleaners to each gas molecule to represent that the speed of the gas molecules moves faster as the liquid molecules. Now you know all the things about solid, liquid, gas, melting, and evaporation. Thanks for watching.
And so I'll show you, this is Flipgrid, and I will just show you what Flipgrid, if you're not familiar with it. Flipgrid is a Microsoft product, and it is accessible. I checked, and if you're able to get Microsoft, you should be able to get Flipgrid. I know that there are people in other countries that do use Flipgrid. And so what it is a platform that you can use for students to create videos. And these are my classes. I have you set up, they're called grids, but essentially a grid is a classroom. And within the classroom, you can set up specific assignments for students. And it gives you controls that you can select how you want the students to be able to interact. That's not what I wanted. You can control what the students are able to do. For example, if you want the students to be able to edit their videos, if you want them to be able to add attachments to their videos, if you want the students to be able to like each other's videos, and if you want students to be able to interact with one another. The interaction would happen with a video. So the young lady who presented that video, I could set it up so that other students could give her a video response. So a way for students to be able to collaborate with each other. You don't necessarily need to have an account to use it to get access to it. You just need the link. And so each video is associated with a unique link, and you just share the link. You can also, the students, and what I do, I give my students the choice with their videos, whether or not they want their videos shared and accessible to the whole class. Particularly if they're speaking on camera. My students tend to be quite shy, and they don't necessarily want the whole class to see all their videos. So I often give them a choice of whether or not they want their videos shared out to the whole class. So they have all these controls, and it is similar in terms of the timing. You can select the time, the amount of time that you want the video to be. You can preset it. They have anywhere from 15 seconds, and the students are very familiar with that because they're all using TikTok, which are 15-second videos. So it's anywhere from 15 seconds up to 10 minutes, I think, is the longest video that you can have. So you are able to set the length of the video that the students can use. So that's one way for students to be able to present their work and to be able to collaborate with their peers. And the other one that I wanted to share with you is Padlet. And I'm not sure how many of you are already using Padlet, but Padlet is another platform where, and this is not my Padlet, this is one that was created that has a bunch of digital science digital resources. So I thought this would be really nice to have as part of the presentation, so you would have it and maybe have some resources that you could explore that might be helpful for you with your students. So basically it would present, the students would be able to have an individual Padlet here, and students can collaborate with each other because everyone's work is all in the same place. So this is a way that they would be able to present work, and they are able to they're able to comment on each other's work. And it's another way for students to be able to interact. And I'm planning to, I haven't done it yet, for their portfolio presentations, I'm actually going to create a Padlet and have all the presentations on a Padlet so that I can share it with the rest of the school, and I can share it with parents as well. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to share with you about ways to get your students collaborating and a way to share their work with authentic audiences. And I know we're very short on time, and I want to take a couple more questions before we end. So I'm going to stop share and take questions.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, so let's see. If you haven't had a chance yet, please do type your questions in the Q&A. One question we often get, and this one comes from Roxana Rodriguez from Panama. What are the assessment strategies that you're using, both for your demonstration activities and, in general right now? We're all dealing with this.
So we don't have, in New York City, there is no state assessment in the 7th grade for science. So that is not something that I have to do. And they've actually canceled our state assessments this year anyway. And so for me, it's just formative and summative assessments. So some of the assignments that in all my assignments, I consider them to be formative assessments, and I've given them with each lab that we do, the demonstration lab, there's questions and a worksheet that goes along with it. So it's not just doing the lab, they also have to answer questions. So that is one of the ways that I assess whether they're making the connection between the activity that we did and the content that we're covering. And then in my school, as I mentioned earlier, the kids are doing these portfolio assessment, which is basically like a final exam for the unit, where they had to do a performance task, which is to do the 3D model, and they had to do either a video or a PowerPoint presentation. And then there's also a constructed response piece. So it's a 2-part assessment. And the constructed response is an application of so what they're doing is showing their understanding in the presentation of the content, the basics of the content, and then how are they able to apply it to a phenomena or a real life scenario. That's the second piece, and that's the constructed response. So that's what we're doing for the assessments.
Well, so for a follow-up on that, so you're getting some really good feedback from students about their understanding. So how are you then giving feedback to them?
That's a great question. So I go through every assignment and I actually give individual feedback to students. So I'll just give an example with the portfolio assessments. The students return their portfolio assessments to me, and I just give individual feedback based on their level of understanding of the concepts. And they don't they're not assigned a grade until I give them the feedback, and then they get to revise it and return it to me, and that's when they get their final grade. And the grade is really just based on a continuum of their understanding of a 1 to 3. So I'm moving more and more toward where are they on the continuum of understanding, as opposed to this is a 65 or an 80 or a 90. And because with the understanding, and even us as learners, adults, when we first encounter something, we're not experts at it right away. It takes time and exposure, and some things you get right away, and then there are other things I have to read like 6 times before I understand it. So really moving more and more myself toward grading on a continuum. And when I'm assessing students, I'm looking at where they are on the continuum and trying to move them to the mastery level.
And so you've spoken a lot about concepts. How about science lab skills? Is that something you believe can be assessed remotely?
I haven't explored that. it's challenging because unless I'm actually watching the student do the activity, and when you're doing a class on Google Meets, or if you're using Zoom, you have, 30 little boxes. It's not really possible for me to actually be able to do an activity and watch my screen all at the same time. So I haven't explored it. The only way that I would think about doing that right now would be to have the students videotape themselves doing something and actually be able to critique, but that I haven't explored that yet. That's a great question, though.
And we have yet another question about assessment, which I think is also very good, which is, are you assessing any quantitative or mathematical skills in addition to this conceptual understanding?
Well, this unit doesn't really lend itself to that, so I haven't had to do it for this particular unit.
Okay. All right, thank you, Art. Let's see, I have a whole bunch of rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
Let's see, we've had a few people who are curious about this parent instruction video. It's actually, I think, quite an innovative idea. And people are wondering if you might be willing to share that video so people can see a model of how you're.
Sure, absolutely. So I will. So we're going to be sharing the present PowerPoint with you, which is very light on text, but what I will be doing is having links there to videos and links to some other things. So what I will do is I'll write that down as one of the videos to include. So my YouTube channel is unlisted, so you only have access to the videos if you have a specific link to the videos. I do that for just privacy and safety reasons. But I will include the screencast that I did for the Google Classroom for the parents in the PowerPoint.
Great. We have a number of questions I've seen in the chat and also in the Q&A, just about how do you manage student submissions? Because that's a lot of, you've mentioned you have around 120 some students,
Yeah.
And if they're all making videos and all submitting responses, this is a lot.
It is a lot. So as I bet, it's a lot of work. What I do, because the students, our mantra in New York City is flexibility. The students have a due date. However, everything is very flexible. And so I never get 120 of anything on one day. So normally when I give the kids an assignment, I might get 30% of the assignment submitted on one given day, and then the others trickle in. And so that gives me time to be able to go through them. And I also only do the live sessions at this point twice a week. And so the other days are the days that I use for planning and grading.
Great, thank you. So again, some kind of questions I think people in general are seeking your wisdom here. Do you have any examples, and this comes from Charles White, I'm sorry I haven't captured everybody's name here, but teacher tested online whiteboard-like collaborative tools. So maybe where this question is going is typically when students do a laboratory activity, there's a collaborative aspect and kind of collaborative sense making and sharing out. Are you able to do that? And specifically, do you know of any whiteboard-like collaborative tools?
I know that there is one on Google Classroom with Google Slides. There's a whiteboard. I haven't explored it yet because my class periods are so short. There really isn't time for a lot of having the students doing things on whiteboards and things like that. Most of my the observations and the communication is verbal. Mm-hmm. But I do know that there is a whiteboard through Google Slides that you can use in conjunction with Google Meets.
Okay, and I know there's something called Jamboard. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but I believe one has to have a special account for that. It's a commercial account, I believe, but that's excellent. And I know a number of, like even Zoom has a shared maybe not Zoom, but a number of.
Zoom has a whiteboard, but it's like it's a hand, you write.
You write, yeah. Got it.
It's not great.
Another question here from Aleda Alvarezin, who is curious to know if you have any alternatives for students who just straight up don't have connectivity. I don't know if that's an issue for you.
We at this point don't have that issue because all of our students got laptops, not laptops, but tablets from the Department of Education. And the tablets that the DOE purchased have a built-in Wi-Fi connection, so they don't need to have external internet at home. And so at this point, it's not an issue. for us. And so if students don't have internet, the only thing that we did in prior to everyone having devices, our students went home with packets. But then that becomes an issue of where do you send the packets and mailing and that kind of thing. So if the students don't have any way to get connectivity, I don't really know how they could do remote learning effectively.
Yeah, great. Okay, and this last question here, I'm not sure if you can address it or not, but there's a lot of talk in general about STEM education, right? Which is something more than just separate disciplines, right? And so I guess we have a question here about, what are your thoughts on the classic model of STEM education and now really combining it with digital technologies, right? So I guess to maybe paraphrase that a little bit, do you view yourself as a science teacher, and or are you able to bring it over into the STEM domain? And is that something that you even want to do? Is that an objective for you? Specifically under this context now with coronavirus.
So my point of view on STEM is that if you're teaching science well, you're teaching STEM. Because technology is not just using a computer, right? That's not the definition of technology. And so a pencil can be technology. So if you're actually teaching science and you're incorporating, so someone asked a question earlier about math, it depends on the application, right? Someone earlier, I saw in the chat something about stoichiometry. If you're doing stoichiometry, that has math embedded. So if you're actually teaching science, you're doing STEM, because if you're doing a long-term investigation, if you're doing controlled experiments, there's data to be collected, there's statistical analysis, so you're doing the math, you're doing the science. The engineering piece, that's the only piece where you have to sort of really think through how to integrate that engineering piece into it and having kids testing solutions and things like that. But I think if you're doing it well, it's already there. So I'm not a person that uses the term STEM a lot, because I feel like if you're teaching science, it's kind of embedded in there, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much, Channa, for sharing all of these resources with us. I'm going to go ahead and quickly pop over and show my final slide, just so that people know where to go if they want to register for additional webinars. I encourage people to come, but yeah, just in general, Channa, thank you so much for your efforts. I think one of the things that we're really trying to promote through I-10 is the power of teachers to impact other teachers, right? We think about their impact on students, but the reality is teachers have got so much to share with each other, and you're just a wonderful example of that. So I appreciate you helping us to kind of, break down borders, right, in some sense, and help people connect on a regional, or in this case, even a global level, because I know we do have a number of participants from Europe as well as from Asia tonight. So, Channa, is there anything final that you would like to say? Any last words?
I just want to thank everyone for attending. This is, like I said in the beginning, some people who may have heard, this was my first time doing a webinar. I've presented live to teachers, and I've done PDs where I've presented live, never done it on a webinar. So I'm very thankful to you for asking me to be here, and thankful to all the people who came from all over the world. I'm really just so humbled to be here and be part of this, and really excited to have the opportunity to share, and also to get information, because I'm reading the chat and there's a ton of ideas and suggestions that people were sharing with each other. And so I really didn't want it just me talking, which it turned out not to be, that it was really a learning experience where I learn, everybody's sharing their knowledge. So thank you to everyone. It was wonderful.
Great, thank you. So just as a reminder to folks, in 24 hours, you'll get an email letting you know that the video has been uploaded, and also we'll have Channa's slides with those links as well. Some of you also may have noted I shared a link in the chat. We've got around 175 free online STEM resources that our teacher fellows have compiled, and if any of you happen to have additional resources that are not on that list, drop me an email. I believe my email is actually on that link. And if you don't see it in the chat, it's actually also on the website where you registered for this webinar. So thank you so much to everybody for coming. Thank you again, Channa. And thanks for everybody who helped out tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful, peaceful, and also a safe rest of the academic year for most of us who are finishing the academic year at this point. And have a great evening.